to get out of here right now. You don't belong here.
They stripped her of her dignity while the jewelry sparkled in cold silence. A manager's smirk, a public scream, and a brutal forced exit, all for a woman they deemed not enough. But as the doors slammed shut, the predator became the prey. They didn't realize she owned the glass, the gold, and their futures. The reckoning starts now. The story is just getting interesting. Subscribe, like and share this video, and drop a comment below to tell the algorithm this story matters. Nisha stood at the center of the showroom floor, her hands folded loosely in front of her, waiting for someone to acknowledge her presence. The store was busy, filled with the low hum of wealthy patrons and the sharp, professional clicks of heels on the floor. But for Nisha, the world had gone silent. 3 sales associates stood behind the glass counters, engaged in quiet conversation or adjusting displays, their eyes darting toward her and then immediately away. She had been standing there for exactly 5 minutes when the first associate, a man in a perfectly tailored suit, walked past her to greet a couple who had just stepped through the door. He didn't offer Nisha a glance, his shoulder nearly brushing hers as he prioritized the new arrivals. Nisha didn't move. She wasn't dressed in the standard uniform of the store's typical Tuesday morning clientele, but she was here for a specific purpose, to see the craftsmanship of a sapphire piece she had personally commissioned for the store's inventory. Another 5 minutes passed. A second employee, a younger woman with a pinback bun, looked directly at Nisha from across the room. Their eyes met for a split second, but rather than approaching, the woman turned her back and began meticulously rearranging a tray of rings that were already perfectly aligned. It was a deliberate act of avoidance. The message was being delivered without a single word. Nisha didn't look like someone who could afford to be there, so she didn't exist. Nisha remained still, her expression unreadable. She watched as the staff moved around her, creating a physical gap, as if she were an obstacle to be avoided rather than a customer to be served. She wasn't looking for a greeting or a glass of water. She was looking for a sign of the company culture she had worked for years to build. Instead, she found a wall of practiced indifference. Finally, the silence was broken not by a welcome, but by a challenge. The receptionist at the front desk, who had been watching Nisha with flat, judging eyes, spoke up. She didn't lower her voice, ensuring her words carried over the ambient noise of the room. "If you're lost, the service entrances are around the back," she said, her tone dripping with the assumption that Nisha could only be there to deliver a package or clean the floors. Nisha turned slowly to face her. "I'm here to see a specific piece," she said, her voice steady and calm. The receptionist didn't hide her smirk as she looked Nisha up and down. "This isn't a place for browsing or fantasies," she replied, echoing a sentiment that seemed to be the unofficial policy of the room. Nisha nodded once, absorbing the dismissal, and waited for the next person to decide how they were going to treat her. Luna Scott didn't approach with the measured pace of a professional. She marched toward Nisha with the focused intent of someone clearing a nuisance from their path. She didn't offer a greeting, and she didn't ask if Nisha needed assistance. Instead, she stopped 2 feet away, her eyes scanning Nisha's traditional attire with a look of pure irritation. "You're making the other customers uncomfortable," Luna said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the quiet murmurs of the showroom. Nisha didn't flinch. "I've been standing here for 10 minutes waiting for someone to show me a specific piece of inventory. I haven't spoken to anyone but your receptionist." "And that's exactly the problem," Luna countered, her volume rising just enough to draw the attention of a nearby couple looking at engagement rings. "You're lingering. This isn't a public gallery where you can just stand around and stare. Our clients come here for a certain level of privacy and exclusivity, and your presence is becoming a distraction." Nisha looked at the manager, noting the tight set of her jaw. "A distraction? I am a customer interested in the sapphire collection. How is my silence distracting?" Luna let out a short, mocking breath. "Let's be honest with each other. We both know you aren't here to buy anything. You're taking up space that belongs to serious buyers. I've already had 2 associates mention that your behavior is unusual. People are starting to look. They are looking because you are speaking to me this way," Nisha replied, her voice remaining unervingly level. I am speaking to you this way because you've ignored the hints to move along, Luna said, leaning in closer. I have a business to run, and that involves maintaining a specific environment. Right now, you are a blemish on that environment. If you don't have a specific appointment or a documented history with this boutique, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside immediately. Nisha didn't move an inch. I don't need an appointment to view the floor stock. That's not the policy of this company. Luna's eyes flashed with a dangerous kind of confidence. In this building, I am the policy. And right now, the policy is that you are no longer welcome. Luna's composure snapped when she realized her previous threats hadn't moved Nisha an inch. She leaned forward, invading Nisha's personal space until they were nearly chest to chest, and thrust a finger toward Nisha's face. I told you to get out, Luna shouted, her voice no longer a professional hiss, but a jagged yell that bounced off the walls. Do you think I'm joking? You come in here dressed like you're at a street festival and expect to be treated like a VIP? Look at yourself. Nisha stood perfectly still, her hands still clasped, her eyes locked onto Luna's with a steadiness that was terrifying in its lack of aggression. She didn't blink as Luna's finger hovered inches from her nose. This silence only seemed to pour gasoline on Luna's rage. Answer me, Luna demanded, her face turning a blotchy red. You're standing there acting like you don't hear me, but you're finished. You're harassing my staff, and you're making my real clients walk out the door. Around the room, the other sales associates and the few remaining customers stopped what they were doing to watch the spectacle. The receptionist smirked from her desk, enjoying the show. Luna, fueled by the audience and Nisha's refusal to cower, took it even further. You think because you're standing there quietly that you have some kind of power? You have nothing. You are a trespasser. You don't belong in this room. You don't belong near these pieces, and you certainly don't belong in my store. Nisha's calm remained a brick wall against Luna's storm. You are making a public scene over a customer asking for service, Nisha said softly, her voice a sharp contrast to Luna's screaming. You aren't a customer. Luna shrieked, her finger jabbed toward the entrance again. A customer has money. A customer has class. You have a lot of nerve coming in here and wasting my time with your little performance. Get out of my sight before I have you thrown out in front of everyone on this street. Nisha didn't flinch at the threat. She simply watched the manager unravel, recording every word and every gesture in her mind, while the room held its breath. Luna's chest heaved with the effort of her anger, her hand trembling as she kept it pointed at the door, desperate for Nisha to show even a flicker of fear or a reason to attack. But Nisha gave her nothing but the truth of her own behavior. Luna didn't wait for a response. She snapped her fingers at the uniformed guard standing near the entrance. Security, get this woman out of here now, she commanded, her voice ringing with a sharp, ugly authority. The guard, a tall man who had been watching the scene with growing impatience, didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his boots heavy on the floor, and reached for Nisha's arm. I'll walk, Nisha said, her voice remaining low and steady, but the guard ignored her. He tightened his grip on her elbow, forcing her to stumble slightly as he began to march her toward the glass doors. The physical contact was unnecessary and aggressive, a final punctuation mark on the humiliation Luna wanted to inflict. Nisha didn't struggle. She kept her head up, her gaze fixed forward as she was paraded past the other customers. She could feel their eyes on her, some filled with pity, others with a cold, detached curiosity. The staff stood like statues, their faces masks of indifference as they watched their manager's order being carried out. Luna followed a few paces behind them, her heels clicking rapidly. She wasn't content with just the removal. She wanted the last word. As they reached the center of the room, she raised her voice for the benefit of everyone watching. Apologies to everyone for the disturbance, Luna announced, her tone shifting into a practiced, corporate sweetness that didn't hide the venom beneath. We have very specific standards to maintain in this establishment. We cannot allow the environment to be compromised by people who don't belong here. The guard reached the heavy front doors and shoved them open, practically thrusting Nisha out onto the sidewalk. The transition from the climate-controlled quiet of the store to the heat and noise of the street was jarring. Nisha regained her balance and turned back just as the doors began to swing shut. Luna stood behind the glass, a triumphant, mocking smile on her face. She adjusted her blazer, looking satisfied, as if she had just successfully removed a stain from a garment. Nisha looked at her through the glass, not with anger, but with a deep, chilling clarity. "You're making a decision you can't undo," Nisha said, though the thick glass muffled her words. Luna didn't need to hear them. She simply turned her back and walked away, returning to her serious clients. Nisha stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the grip of the guard still burning on her skin. She didn't look back again. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and began to dial. Nisha stood on the sidewalk, the humidity of the afternoon settling over her, but she didn't feel the heat. She took a breath, smoothed the fabric of her sari where the guard had bunched it up, and pulled her phone from her clutch. She didn't pace, and she didn't look back through the glass at the staff who were likely still congratulating themselves. She simply scrolled through her contacts until she found the direct line for the regional office. The call was answered on the second ring. "Belle Cooper's office," a voice said. "It's Nisha Mehta," she said. The tone of her voice was flat, professional, and entirely devoid of the shaking anger most people would have felt. "Is Belle available?" There was a momentary pause on the other end, a sudden shift in the receptionist's energy. "One moment, Ms. Mehta. I'll patch you through immediately." A few seconds of silence followed before Belle Cooper's voice came onto the line, sounding surprised but alert. "Nisha? I didn't expect to hear from you until the quarterly review next month. Is everything all right?" "I'm standing outside the West Side flagship location," Nisha said, looking at a passing car rather than the store. "I attempted a walkthrough today. I wasn't recognized, which was the intent. However, I was denied service within 10 minutes of entering. I was told I didn't belong in the environment, accused of loitering, and just now, I was physically removed from the premises by security on the manager's orders." The silence from Belle was heavy. Nisha could hear the sound of a pen hitting a desk. "Physically removed?" "Nisha, I am so sorry. I had no idea." "I don't need an apology, Belle," Nisha interrupted quietly. "I need you to meet me here in 30 minutes. Bring the current employment contracts for the floor manager and the lead receptionist. We are going to have a conversation about the standards being maintained at this branch." "I'm leaving now," Belle said, her voice tight with a mix of shock and professional dread. "I'll be there in 20. 30 is fine," Nisha replied. "I'll be waiting across the street." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her bag. There had been no shouting, no threats, and no mention of the manager's name. She didn't need to vent her frustration to a colleague. The facts spoke for themselves. She crossed the street to a small bench, sat down, and waited, watching the front doors of her own company as if she were a complete stranger to it. Exactly 40 minutes after she had been forced out, Nisha walked back through the heavy front doors. She didn't hesitate at the threshold. She moved with a quiet, deliberate pace that drew immediate attention. The showroom was slightly quieter now, but the staff's reaction was instantaneous. The receptionist looked up, her face twisting into a mask of pure disbelief. Before Nisha could even reach the center of the floor, the woman was already reaching for her desk phone. "She's back," the receptionist hissed into the receiver, her eyes locked on Nisha as if she were a recurring nightmare. Luna Scott emerged from a side office seconds later, her face flushed with a fresh wave of indignation. She didn't even wait to close the distance. "I thought I made myself clear," Luna shouted, her voice cutting through the air. She was already scanning the room for the security guard, her hand raised to signal him. "You were warned. You are trespassing, and this time, I'm not just having you removed. I'm calling the police." Luna stepped forward, her mouth open to deliver another insult, but the words died in her throat. She froze mid-stride, her hand dropping slowly to her side. Her gaze had shifted past Nisha to the woman walking 3 steps behind her. Belle Cooper, the regional director, stepped into the light. She wasn't looking at the jewelry or the customers. She was looking at Luna with an expression of cold, professional fury. Belle was carrying a thick manila folder, her face pale and her lips set in a thin, tight line. The security guard, who had been moving toward Nisha with his hand on his belt, stopped dead. He looked from Nisha to Belle, and then to Luna, the confusion on his face slowly being replaced by a dawning sense of dread. The silence that followed was heavy. The receptionist, still holding the phone to her ear, slowly set it back in its cradle. Luna's confident posture crumbled. She tried to find her voice, her eyes darting between Nisha's calm face and Belle's icy stare. "Miss Cooper," Luna stammered, her voice suddenly thin and shaky. I didn't realize you were coming in today. This woman, she's been causing a disturbance. I was just—" "Be quiet, Luna," Belle said. The authority in her voice was absolute. She didn't look at Luna for more than a second before turning her full attention to Nisha. Belle stepped forward and stood slightly behind Nisha's shoulder, a gesture of deference that made the entire room go still. "Ma'am," Belle said, her voice audible to everyone in the immediate area. "How would you like to proceed?" Luna's face went from red to a ghostly white. She looked at Nisha, really looked at her, and the realization hit her like a physical blow. The woman in the sari wasn't a loiterer or a distraction. She was the one who signed the checks. "Nisha, please," Belle whispered, her voice cracking as she finally found it. She ignored Luna entirely, stepping closer to Nisha as if trying to shield her from the very walls of the building. "I am profoundly sorry. I have no words for how unacceptable this reception was. I was horrified to hear your call, but seeing you standing here after—" She stopped, her gaze flickering momentarily to the security guard who was now trying to shrink into the background. Belle turned her head just enough to address the room, though her focus remained on Nisha. "Do any of you have even the slightest idea who you are looking at?" she asked. The question wasn't a shout. It was a low, vibrating demand for accountability. The sales associates, who had been so comfortable in their indifference minutes ago, began to back away from their counters. The receptionist looked like she wanted to disappear beneath her desk. But it was Luna who bore the brunt of Belle's reaction. The regional director finally looked at the manager, and the disgust on her face was visceral. "I've spent 3 years telling you that our brand is built on equity and respect," Belle said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear for her own career. "And in less than an hour, you've proven that you learned nothing. You didn't just fail a customer today. You showed the founder of this company exactly how much you despise the values she spent a lifetime establishing." Nisha didn't interrupt. She watched Belle's reaction with the same detached observation she had used on Luna. She saw the sweat on Belle's brow and the way her hands shook as she held the personnel files. Belle reached out as if to touch Nisha's arm in a gesture of comfort, then quickly pulled back, remembering the unnecessary contact Nisha had mentioned on the phone. "I will make this right, Nisha," Belle promised, her voice frantic. "Every person involved, every policy that was twisted to justify this, it ends right now. This is not the Meta Group. This is an embarrassment." Nisha finally spoke, her voice a calm anchor in the middle of Belle's panic. "The embarrassment isn't just the action, Belle. It's the environment that made the action feel safe. You are the director of this region. You told me these people were ready." Belle's face fell. The terror intensified. She realized then that the reckoning wasn't just for the manager. It was a shadow falling over everyone in the chain of command. Nisha didn't wait for Luna to find her breath. She took 2 steps forward, closing the remaining distance until she was standing exactly where she had been when Luna was screaming in her face. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had vanished. Luna took a frantic step back, her heel catching on a floor tile, her eyes darting toward Belle Cooper for help that was never coming. "You asked me earlier if I knew where I was," Nisha said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden, suffocating silence of the store, it carried to the back offices. "I know this building. I know the lease terms for this corner lot. I know the exact percentage of purity in the sapphire piece you refused to show me, because I'm the one who approved the design sketches 6 months ago." Luna's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like she was choking on the air in her own showroom. Nisha reached out her hand, palm up. It was a simple, clinical gesture. "The keys, Luna. And your ID badge," Nisha said. I had no way of knowing," Luna whispered, her voice cracking. You didn't say who you were. You just stood there. That is the point, Nisha replied. You shouldn't have to be the founder of the Meta Jewelry Group to be treated like a human being in this store. My name is on the door, on the bags, and on your paycheck. But today, I was just a woman in a sari who wanted to see a necklace. And that woman wasn't good enough for you. Nisha turned her gaze to the receptionist, who was trembling behind the desk. You told me to use the service entrance. You assumed that because of how I look, I was here to serve you. In reality, you are here to serve our clients. All of them. Luna fumbled with the lanyard around her neck, her fingers shaking so violently she could barely unhook the clip. She laid the badge and a heavy set of brass keys into Nisha's open palm. The metal clinked softly, a final, cold sound that signaled the end of Luna's career. I've spent 20 years building a brand that stands for heritage and inclusion, Nisha said, looking at the keys. You turned it into a club for people you deem worthy. You aren't protecting my standards, Luna. You're destroying them. Nisha handed the keys and the badge to Belle Cooper without looking at her. I am Nisha Mehta, she said, addressing the entire room now, the frozen staff and the stunned customers. And if anyone in this room believes that status is a requirement for dignity, you are in the wrong building. Nisha looked away from Luna and turned to face the rest of the staff. The sales associates who had spent the morning pretending she was invisible now stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the floor. The customers who had watched the earlier humiliation were now watching the aftermath, the room so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. The three of you, Nisha said, gesturing to the salespeople who had ignored her. You saw what happened. You heard the insults. You watched a security guard put his hands on a woman who was doing nothing but standing still. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Not one of you spoke up. Not one of you asked if I needed help or suggested that the manager was crossing a line. You chose silence because you thought it was safer. But in this company, silence in the face of cruelty is a choice to support it. She turned back to Belle Cooper, whose face was still a mask of professional dread. Belle, I want a full review of the commission logs for this branch. I want to see how many other people were ignored because they didn't fit a certain image. As for the receptionist and the guard, they are terminated, effective immediately. Their behavior wasn't just a mistake. It was a reflection of the culture they were allowed to build here. Luna stood off to the side, her eyes darting toward the customers she had spent all morning trying to impress. Those same customers were now looking at her with a mixture of pity and secondhand embarrassment. There was no more exclusivity to protect. The mask of high-end service had been stripped away, leaving only the ugly reality of her bias. You're free to go, Luna, Nisha said, her voice dropping to a final, cold note. You can explain to your next employer why you were removed from a flagship store in the middle of a Tuesday. Maybe you'll tell them it was a misunderstanding. But we both know the truth. You saw a sari, and you decided I wasn't worth your time. Nisha straightened her attire, the same sari that Luna had mocked, and walked toward the exit. She didn't look back to see Luna gathering her things or the staff whispering in the corners. She didn't need to. At the door, she stopped and looked at the remaining employees one last time. Dignity isn't a luxury item, Nisha said. It's the minimum requirement. Remember that when the next person walks through these doors. She pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk, leaving the silence of the store behind her. Behind the glass, careers were over, and a reputation was in ruins. Nisha didn't feel a sense of triumph. Only the quiet, heavy realization that the work of building a truly inclusive company was far from finished. She walked away, the sound of her own steady footsteps the only thing she cared to hear. Nisha didn't feel a sense of triumph. Only the quiet, heavy realization that the work of building a truly inclusive company was far from finished. She walked away, the sound of her own steady footsteps the only thing she cared to hear. They mistook her silence for weakness, but it was actually an inventory of their character. In 60 minutes, a manager's decade-long career was erased by a single hour of prejudice. This wasn't just about a woman in a sari. It was about the cost of arrogance and the weight of quiet complicity. If this story reminded you that dignity is not a luxury, let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what was the moment that hit you the hardest? Don't forget to like and share this story to spread the message that respect is the only true currency. Subscribe and turn on notifications to join our community for more stories where arrogance falls and dignity wins in the most unforgettable ways. See you in the next one.